Hello friends, this video on human eye and the colorful world part 1 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. Topics to be covered in this lesson are human eye, power of accommodation, defects of vision, refraction through a prism, dispersion of light, atmospheric refraction, and scattering of light. So in our previous lesson, we talked about some of the phenomena shown by light, and mainly we talked about reflection and refraction of light. So here in this lesson, we will talk about some of the things which make use of these phenomena shown by light. So first we'll talk about the human eye. We will see how this human eye make use of these phenomena of reflection and refraction and helps us to view things around us. So as we all know, human eye is a beautiful gift of nature which enables us to see the things around us. The interesting thing here is to find out how does the eye function? How does it enable us to see things? In order to know that, first of all, let us try to see the different components of the eye. What are the various parts present in the eye? So let us first look at the structure of the eye. So we'll start from the outermost part. So first comes the cornea. As you can see in this figure, this is a side view of the eye. So cornea forms the outermost covering, as you can see here. So this portion, this outermost covering which protects the eye is the cornea. As we go little inside, there is a fluid called aqueous humor just after the cornea. So our cornea is the outermost covering which covers a fluid-like structure known as aqueous humor. Next comes a small opening. As you can see here, this small opening is termed as pupil. A little beyond that comes iris, which makes this small opening. As you can see here, this black colored structure is the iris, and this forms because of this iris actually controls the size of the pupil. You can see here, when this iris will come closer to each other, your pupil will become smaller. When they move away from each other, the pupil will increase in size. Next is the eye lens, which actually forms the image of the object. In our previous lesson, we talked about how image formation takes place by lens, right? So here also the eye lens also serves the same purpose. It helps in the formation of image. Then you have something called ciliary muscles. So in our next few slides, we will talk about the function of each of these parts. So here I am just trying to make you aware of the different parts which make up the eye. So these ciliary muscles are present just along with the lens. I mean, the lens, the size of the lens actually is controlled by these ciliary muscles which are present on either end of the lens. Then you again have a fluid-like substance called vitreous humor. So this fluid-like substance fills this entire space of the eyeball. So this whole space is filled with vitreous humor. Then you have the retina. So retina is this portion where the image is formed, because the object will be somewhere here, right? This lens will form an image for that object. So every time whatever object we look at, the image has to be formed on this structure known as retina. And then you have something called optic nerves which connects this retina and takes the signals to the brain. So that is how whatever you see or whatever you view is carried away to the brain, and then you take appropriate actions for viewing. So now we will look at, now that we are aware of the structure of the eye, we will look at the functioning of each of these parts. Now let us look at the function of each of the components of the eye. So whatever components we discussed in the previous slide, we will see what is the function of each of them. So let us again start with the cornea. So what is the purpose of cornea? It is a thin membrane through which light enters the eye, right? Because it is the outermost membrane, in a way it protects the eye, right? So it is a thin membrane through which light will enter the eye. Next comes the aqueous humor. Aqueous humor is a fluid, mostly water, to maintain the correct pressure balance inside the eye. So this aqueous humor will maintain a correct pressure balance. And also, when light enters the eye, because of a change in refractive index, for example, let us suppose outside it is air, right? Inside, when it comes, this aqueous humor has a refractive index of its own. So there is a change in refractive index, so refraction of light takes place, right? Next is the pupil. What is pupil? Pupil controls the amount of light entering the eye. So if you see in this figure very clearly, pupil is you can imagine it like a door, right? For example, how is the door constructed in your house? Door is nothing but an opening in the wall through which people can come in and go out. Similarly, this pupil is also an opening through which light can enter inside the eye. Now, this pupil will control the amount of light entering the eye. It will neither allow too much of light to enter the eye, nor it will allow very less amount of light to enter the eye. You would have observed that when you go out and it is extremely sunny outside, that means there is too much of light outside. What happens? You see that your eyes tend to contract. I mean, the pupil tends to contract. Pupil tends to become smaller so that lesser amount of light enter the eye. Similarly, when you enter an area where there is dim light, this pupil tries to increase the intake of light so that more and more amount of light can enter the eye. Right? So this pupil actually controls the amount of light entering the eye. So pupil is actually, cornea forms the outermost membrane through which anything will enter the eye. Like it is like an outermost protective covering for the eye. But pupil is actually the door which allows the entry of light inside the eye. Then we have another structure called iris, which controls. It is a dark muscular diaphragm that controls the size of the pupil. So we can say that pupil and iris together actually controls the amount of light entering the eye. And once light enters inside the pupil, there is no comeback. It is unidirectional. That means once light entered, cannot come out, right? So iris is this region, this diaphragm, which you can see here. It is a dark muscular diaphragm. So when the iris on two sides, they come closer, then the size of the pupil will decrease. When the iris on both sides go away from each other, then the size of the pupil will increase. So iris and pupil together controls the amount of light depending upon the situation. Next is the eye lens. Eye lens, what does it do? It helps in finer adjustment of focal length needed to focus objects at different distance on retina. So the purpose of the eye lens is nothing but image formation. Now, not only image formation, but image formation on retina. So no matter wherever the object is placed, the image should always be formed on retina. So how is that possible? You had seen in the previous lesson that as the object distance changes, the image distance also changes. As u changes, v also changes as per the lens formula, right? But if you want that the image distance should always remain the same, but the object distance is varying, then what is the other factor that controls it? The other factor is the focal length. So what you can do, if you want the image distance to be constant, with the change in object distance, you have to change the focal length of the eye lens, right? So the purpose of the eye lens is to form images on retina. Real and inverted image is formed on the retina. Next is the ciliary muscles. So these ciliary muscles are actually responsible for changing the curvature of eye lens. And they change the curvature of the eye lens, and once the curvature is changed, that means the focal length also changes. What do you mean by curvature? Curvature is nothing but, let us suppose I have a lens like this, I have another lens like this, and I have another thin lens like this. So what is the difference in all of these? In this, the curvature is intermediate. In this case, the curvature is more. and in this case the curvature is very less. So if the curvature is less, the radius of curvature will also vary. As the curvature of the lens changes, the value for radius of curvature also changes. If the value of radius of curvature changes, the value of focal length also changes, right? So by changing the ciliary muscles, where are the ciliary muscles present? They are present here. On either side of the lens, the ciliary muscles are present. So when the ciliary muscles contract, let us suppose these are the ciliary muscles. When they expand, the lens becomes thicker, right? So when the ciliary muscles expand, the lens becomes thicker. As a result, the focal length increases. Whereas when the ciliary muscles contract, the lens becomes comparatively thinner, and therefore the focal length also decreases, right? So by expansion and contraction of the ciliary muscles can control the focal length of the lens, and thus by varying the focal length of the lens depending upon the object distance, it can always form the image on retina. Next is vitreous humor, which is again a jelly-like fluid which holds the spherical shape of the eye. If you see, this entire area of the eye is made up of vitreous humor. So this is a jelly-like fluid which maintains the more or less spherical shape of the eye. Because when we see our eyes, when we see a front view, here I have shown you the side view, because from the side view only you can see each of the components. From the front view, you do not see all the components. You are able to see the cornea, that is the outermost covering. Then you are able to see the pupil, that is the small black dot which you have in the middle of your eye, right? You are also able to see iris, which is the outermost covering of the pupil. Just around the pupil, when you look at your eye, it is somewhat like this, right? So this small portion at the middle, that is the pupil. Outside the pupil, the region which you see, that is the iris. And the region, the white portion which you see, which contains some fluid-like structure, that is the aqueous humor. Even behind that, you have something called eye lens, which we do not see from the front view. So from the front view, we are only able to see cornea, pupil, iris. So behind that, the lens is not visible from the front view. Similarly, retina is also not visible, vitreous humor is also not visible. But actually this eye, our eye is spherical in shape. It is like it is put inside a socket. So from front, we feel as if it is circular in shape, but actually it is a sphere which is put inside a socket kind of structure. So this vitreous humor actually maintains the spherical shape of the eye. Like how you would have seen that if you take a balloon and fill water inside it, what happens? The balloon gets inflated. So the spherical shape of the balloon is because of the fluid which is present inside it. Similarly, for eye also, the spherical structure is maintained because of this vitreous humor. Next is the retina. It is an important part of the eye. It is a light sensitive screen on which image is formed. So it is this retina contains light sensitive cells called rods and cones. So these are the components which constitute the retina. So on the retina, you have some light sensitive cells. What do? When a light is received on retina, they generate some electrical signals. So that means the light energy gets converted into electrical energy. So these rods and cones are nothing but receptors. They are receptors of light, and they generate electrical signals. And the retina acts as a screen where the image is formed. Now, what kind of image is formed by this lens which you see here? This lens forms a real and inverted image. But do you think that whatever we see before us, we see it inverted? We do not see it inverted, right? We see it erect. So how does the inverted image gets converted into an erect image? That happens because of these rods and cones. These rods and cones generate some electrical signals, and then comes the role of the optic nerves. The optic nerves send these electrical signals to the brain. So what happens? What does the brain do? Then brain receives those electrical signals, and they manipulate the signals and give an erect image. right? For example, I will give you an example. Let us suppose you are standing in front of a school, right? The purpose of your eye is to form an image of the object which you are seeing. So you are seeing the object school. What is the object that you are seeing? You are seeing a building, right? So the purpose of the eye is to form an image of that building. So it has formed a real and inverted image of that building on your retina. But what makes you feel, what makes you understand that this is a school or this is a building, that is done by your brain. So now this image is taken by the optic nerve to the brain, and then brain decides what is it that I am viewing. First of all, brain will convert that inverted image into an erect image. So you will be able to see, so now you are able to see an erect image. And brain also enables you to understand what you are seeing. That means, suppose if I am seeing something, I should be able to know what I am seeing. So that understanding comes only from the brain. So brain actually helps us to interpret what we are viewing. Correct? So I hope you understood how does an eye function. So eye consists of the cornea, which is a thin membrane which protects the entire eye. Light will enter through this membrane. After that, it will pass through aqueous humor, which is a fluid-like structure, and it has got some refractive index, because of which diffraction will take place here. Then comes the pupil, which will control the pupil, which is surrounded by iris. So pupil and iris together will control the amount of light entering the eye. Thereafter, you will encounter the eye lens, which will form the image, because when light rays fall on this eye lens, image will be formed. So it will make sure that image is formed on the retina. So in order to make sure that the image is always formed on retina, there are ciliary muscles whose contraction and expansion will change the focal length of the lens. So the lens will change its focal length depending upon the distance of the object. Then comes the vitreous humor, which is a fluid-like structure that controls the spherical shape of the eye. Thereafter comes retina, where the image is formed, and also retina contains some light-sensitive cells called rods and cones, which generate electrical signals, which in turn are carried by the optic nerves to the brain, and brain thus helps us to interpret whatever we. So this is how our eye functions. Thank you. Please visit examfear.com to watch free educational videos, try free online tests, get the best quality study materials, study from the best tutors and mentors, and much more. Thank you once again.